Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Safety and Risk Success podcast. I'm your host, Christian Harris. One of the things that I do over and above my role with Slip Safety Services and hosting this podcast is I contribute to the HC People panel. And they've been promoting what they've been calling Food Safety February. So I thought, given it's the last Saturday of February, it would be remiss of me not to have a food safety related episode of the podcast. And so I'm delighted today to be joined by Brendon Ireland. Brendon is really passionate about the subject of food safety. He's a trained chef, and so he brings that expertise with him into his role now as a consultant, where he helps a number of businesses to try to be on the right side of the food safety line in the sand. We talk in this conversation about some of the trends in food safety, Natashas Law being something that's been in the public eye recently, of course, as well as kind of, what's been going on with legislation, what's likely to go on in terms of future changes, where do companies get this wrong, how big a problem is this, and interestingly, does Brendon eat out or not? And that's the central question we thought would be good as a title: how safe is eating out? So let's answer that now with Brendon Ireland. Cheers. Welcome to the podcast, Brendon.
Oh, marvellous. Thank you. Pleasure to have me.
It's a returning favour because you've had me on your podcast as well.
Yeah, we've been dancing, if you want to call it, for what, almost a year now, because it's about a year.
Yeah, we have actually been on this podcast, haven't you? But you're on one of the roundtable discussions, so we didn't get to talk to you that much.
No, I do quite enjoy the roundtables because it means I can just sort of sit back and watch from a distance. Because I always feel like I'm the odd one out because everybody else is very health and safety focused, whereas I'm just there, just me and my bacteria and my viruses, just getting along together.
Well, there you go. If that's not an interesting party, then I don't know what is. So let's hit the ground running then. We want to ask the question in this episode: how safe is eating out? So let's start with a hard-hitting question for you. Do you, with all of your knowledge and expertise, eat out?
Yes, I'm very. I mean, it's a very complicated question. I mean, when I am eating out, the main thing I'm looking for, I mean, I do check on the FSA ratings that you do see, but there's a little bit of a more deeper story that goes into that, where the actual inspections are broken down into three areas. One of them is the hygienic handling practices, which goes from the general preparation, how good are they washing their hands, storage, etc. So that's like the fridges. Then you've got another one, which is like the structural requirements, which falls into the general structure of the building, pest controls, etc. And then your final one is the management, which all goes for like the confidence in how the training goes, the paperwork, etc. So if the business has got a low score, but all it is the management side, I'm not really going to be too concerned. Whereas if they failed and they've got maybe a 0 or a 1 and it's all down to the hygiene, that's maybe where I might stay clear of that business.
Yes. And is that something, I guess you do, well, I've never looked, to be honest, but that's not listed on the actual certificate that they put up on the wall, is it? Is that something you find on the website beforehand?
Yeah, you'll only ever see that on the FSA scores website or on the audit report that the council has put together. It's quite surprising, all the audit reports from every single business. If you ask a business and they say, oh, we failed because of paperwork, you can actually put a freedom of information request in with the council that inspected them, and that audit report will actually tell you everything that went wrong in the business.
To check if they're telling porcupines or not.
Yes.
No, that's interesting. So how often do you eat out then? Because it sounds like a bit like me going to, I've been put off going swimming in this role because I'm paranoid about how slippery and unhygienic the floors are in changing rooms and things like that. So it must be similar for you.
I am very cautious. I mean, there are some rolling offenders that you always a bit cautious about, almost like the authentic takeaways. And that's not necessarily me being stereotypical. It's because if it's authentic, it's individuals that have come over into this country that are very used to their own practices. And one of the biggest challenges I have is when I'm trying to communicate with these people that are completely different ethnicity. You're trying to explain to them all about food safety, where in their home country, there isn't such a thing as food safety about the correct storage, etc. And it's really quite interesting because we have a virus, which is hepatitis E, which can be associated with pork. So eating the undercooked pork can give you hepatitis. And it's actually found that Egyptians have actually got the natural antibody to hepatitis E. And it's believed because their culture has eaten essentially undercooked or raw pork for that many generations that they've just got a natural immunity to it. So for these other ethnicities, because they've never had any drastic problems and stuff like that, they just think that's absolutely fine. And it's probably only the same with our cultures, that other countries look at us and think, well, they're doing things a bit weird.
Yeah, I mean, is the UK sort of leading the world, would you say, when it comes to food safety standards?
We're probably up there. We're not quite the best. There is a couple of other countries that are definitely leading above us, especially places like Japan and the United States. They're now doing wonders with their food safety controls, etc. But when we look to last year, the FSA, so the UK's regulatory body for food safety, they hosted the first international conference on food safety. So it does speak volumes that the FSA were the first picked.
I mean, certainly you probably know this, and many in the audience would, but in health and safety world, you know, the UK would be considered to be, again, perhaps not the leader, but certainly well among the leaders in terms of legislation and support and things like that. So yeah, I'm glad to hear that it's the same with food safety as well. So if we try to sort of encapsulate this in terms of a risk or a problem, because we're all about safety and risk on the podcast. I mean, how many food safety issues are there in sort of commercial kitchens every year in the UK? And then kind of what proportion of those are serious, as in, you know, life-threatening, that kind of, or causing, you know, severe ongoing issues?
Well, I think this might be very, very similar to the health and safety world. I think there's not as many recorded, well, there's so many recorded problems, but then the actual real life problems that we have is probably substantially more. And I mean, I work with a lot of general just hospitality businesses, and then you'd probably be looking at maybe 200 issues a month that go on, but only minor issues, simple things like salad where it's been washed, but there's still like a caterpillar that's made it through to the end plate, or just simple problems with machinery or equipment where part of it's chipped off and it's made its way into food. You'll always get those sort of problems. But I'm guessing the question that you're asking is sort of those more serious ones where sort of like notified. And quite luckily in this country, we don't have too many. Not a substantial amount. And since it became a sort of like that legal requirement that anybody in a food business that's handling food must receive some sort of training, whether it be accredited or just a general formal training. Since then, the stats for food safety issues and problems have been dropping year by year. There was a bit of an inflation towards sort of 2018, but then even since then it's still been dropping, and we don't tend to hear too much about it. So hopefully, fingers crossed, we're getting to that point now where it's just one of those things that you hear on an odd occasion.
Yeah, that was my impression, and you don't tend to hear that many cases of, you know, deaths or things like that. We get on to, you know, the Natashas Law and that example later, but that's good to hear. So why is it then that we're finding, you know, 200 odd a month of these kind of less severe incidents? You know, what do you put that down to in your experience?
It's, well, at this moment in time, with everything that's gone off in the world, the virus, Brexit, I mean, hospitality, it's always been an industry that has been very inclusive to the outside world. It's never been a very heavily English or British industry in this country. I mean, that's always been mainly on the wages side of things, and a lot of the culinary side in the UK. they've had a massive shift over these past 5 years where it's gone from accepting sort of a minimum wage standard to, well, I can go and stack shelves in a supermarket for more money, have my weekends off, have my evenings off. So if you're sort of stuck in that position and thinking, well, do I want to work 12, 14 hours a day, stood on my feet for the same money as somebody stacking a shelf in a supermarket and not really seeing my family and struggling with my health? Because every single person in hospitality, they have some sort of addiction, whether it be coffee, cigarettes, alcohol, gambling. There's a wide range of problems within hospitality that need sorting out. So part of that will relate over to the problems that go into the kitchen. And naturally, it's a fast-paced environment. Some kitchens, they can be banging out 100, 200 meals in an hour. So you can imagine how fast-paced it is. And in all that anarchy, things just go wrong. If you imagine you're there, you're on the salad section, you've got to produce salads for the salad bowl. So Caesar salad, tuna niçoise, but then you've also got to do the salad garnishes for all the steaks and every other main dish. So you're there, you're getting hounded by the head chef, the general manager's coming in saying, where's this salad, where's this thing? And then you've got waiters and waitresses also coming in, demanding tables. You're going to rush through it because the business demands for it. So within all that anarchy, it's just one of those things where problems just always go through. But then going back to the whole thing about Brexit and coronavirus, hospitality is really, really struggling now. I mean, there was so much over the Christmas period, as you'll probably be very well aware, of hospitality businesses just really concerned about whether they're going to make it through Christmas because they're having all these cancellations because there was uncertainty of whether we're going to go into another lockdown. Hospitality was the first to be officially locked down back in March 2020, if we can remember that far ago.
Yep.
So they've really, really been hurt quite deeply, and the finances have contributed towards that as well. So if you are owning a hospitality business and you are struck for finances, where are you going to put that finances? You're going to put it obviously on the ingredients, you're going to put it on the staff. What are you going to start reducing? Well, it's obviously going to be staff training. If you know that you can get staff training for £35 for a level 2 food hygiene online, where someone just has to sit there with a PowerPoint presentation, click through the different PowerPoints and they get a certificate at the end of it, you're going to take that over trying to send them to me, paying a couple of £100 per day for their learners. You're easily going to choose that cheaper option, which, as we all know, the online versions, yeah, they have their purpose, but they're not designed for the kind of people that are taking them. And then the same with equipment as well. You're not going to keep up on servicing, you're not going to get equipment repaired, and ultimately that is going to affect the end product and compromise the safety of food.
So it sounds like, again, parallel with health and safety, it's investment and sensible, prudent decision making that is going to be the difference here in terms of reducing the frequency of some of these issues and obviously reducing the risk of something more severe happening as well.
Yeah, it's a very, very difficult position to be in. It's because I mean, hospitality is just one of those businesses where your money is the people that walk through the door. So yeah, you're always battling with that internal part of you. It's like, well, I know we're struggling. We've not quite got the standards that we once had, but if we turn away these customers, then we're not really going to have that money coming in to be able to put those things in place.
And the margins are pretty tight as well, aren't they? I mean, it's not as if, these places that were having to trade at 50% capacity, but that were full at 50% capacity, were making a profit. That was a loss-making endeavor, even though they were full.
Yeah, hospitality is probably one of the worst businesses to ever go in. If anybody's listening to this and you're thinking one morning, and the amount of couples that I speak to that have said to me, oh, we're thinking about opening up a pub. And it's like, right, okay, well, how have you thought about this? We got up on a Sunday morning, sat in bed with a coffee and think, yeah, this would be nice. We'll open up a pub. We'll have a free bar and be able to have a good laugh with the locals. And you have to sort of bring them back to earth and sort of say, right, if you're going to be opening up a pub, you have to realize that that's your life gone. You will be in there from 8 o'clock in the morning till midnight every single day, catching up on orders, doing your line cleans, filling in for when staff call in sick, managing your staff, managing your taxes, managing your payroll. And whilst all you're doing that, you've obviously got to make sure that you've got your beer in stock, etc. And there's a brilliant quote that I remember from a landlady that ran a pub. And she said there's one moment she realized that she knew she wanted to stay in the pub trade. And that was being there on Christmas morning at 9 o'clock in the morning, scrubbing out a toilet. And she said, if she couldn't do it then it's never going to work for her. So if anybody is listening and they're thinking of a pub or a restaurant, think to yourself, do you want to be up Christmas morning when everybody else is having a lie-in, standing there, scrubbing the toilet, doing unpleasant jobs that you would never think to yourself you'd ever be doing? If you can't be motivated after doing something like that, it's never going to work for you in hospitality.
Yeah, got some family experience actually. My mum ran a pub for a few years when I was younger, and my brother-in-law now runs a pub. So, and I can attest that it is very, very hard work and all-consuming. So yeah, you do need to have a lot of drive and motivation, and have that right kind of personality to want to get into that sector for sure. In that kind of business, anyway, running a pub. I've always fancifully thought that having a restaurant might be nice when I'm older, but I think you've changed my mind now.
Well, the margins are incredibly small.
Yeah.
The margins of a restaurant are probably about 5% net, if that.
Yeah. It's is that the same even for your sort of Le Gavroche type 3 Michelin star places? I guess the bills are more expensive, but the margins are maybe still not great.
Well, you have to think all these businesses, you might walk into a restaurant at 7 o'clock on a Saturday evening and you might be heaving, but all those people, they're paying for all the bills for the rest of the week where they've only got a couple of tables in. Yeah,
it's very true. I often think that just walking down my local high street and seeing there's various bars and restaurants and pubs, and they really do vary in terms of how busy they are. So yeah, some nights they're heaving and other nights they're just totally dead, and you think, wow, it's a tough life.
It is. It's not an enjoyable life, but if you crack it, especially from the kitchen front, when you are the middle of a Saturday night service, you've got maybe 30 tickets on with loads of different food orders, etc., and everything's just coming together. You've got enough prep, and there's no backlog of anything. That rush of service is unlike anything you will have ever experienced. It's almost like a euphoria. You're always trying to chase once you've experienced it and once you've had that fantastic service. Yeah, interesting, isn't it? In that kind of flow state, which people talk about and aspire to, and I could see how that would definitely be an example of that. So if some of these kind of minor things are flagged up, what are the kind of consequences of that for a business? And then conversely, what might happen if there is something terrible that happens and somebody gets killed, for example, like we've seen some examples of. There's a shepherd's pie incident, and there's the allergen Pret incident, which we're going to talk about as well. What are the downsides to getting this wrong from a business perspective? Well, I think both the cases, so the one with the shepherd's pie and the allergen incident, I think now in this day and age within just food in general, it's really concerning, because when you're preparing something, when you're serving something, that there's a potential that you won't even know that something has gone wrong until maybe a couple of days down the line. There's a very good chance if you eat something today and it's quite bad for you, you'll maybe wake up tomorrow morning with an upset stomach. And as the day goes on, you'll have even more bloated stomach, and you'll have severe cramps and severe flatulence. And then as you get into that second day past it, it will just become unbearable, which is when you will go to hospital, and then the doctors will obviously run their tests, and then it would prove you've had food poisoning from whatever bacterium or virus it may be. And then that will then relay back to the council, and then it will relay back eventually to the restaurant when the council do their inspections. So this could be, for instance, a week down the line from when you serve this individual. So for restaurants, for the major incidents, it can be sort of like really, really surprising, because most of the time when you find out about these things, it's when you're like really, really quiet and you've not got that hype of the service. Whereas with the allergens, I mean, the Pret a Manger incident that resulted in what is now the Natashas Law that we refer to, that was very similar. It was a young girl that had a baguette. It was the whole story was the baguette, the ingredients was only partial, which was accurate for that time's legislation. Businesses didn't need to include the full ingredients list. Yeah. I mean, it's really bizarre that they wouldn't include one of the main allergens on the legislation. But because it only had a partial ingredients list, I mean, it's only like me and you, if we had an allergen and we went up to somewhere and there was only so many ingredients on there, but our allergen wasn't on there, we'll be thinking, well, obviously that's going to be fine for us, we'll have it. And it just so happened she was on a plane when she had her anaphylactic shock. So it's probably the worst place in the world to ever have any allergic reaction. Up in the air 30,000 feet, it's a complete nightmare. Because one of the big things about anaphylaxis, and this is what I instruct to every single hospitality business, if any guest eats at a restaurant or pub, wherever it may be, if they have an anaphylactic shock, even if they say, don't worry, I've got a immunoinjector or a EpiPen, and they administer it, still call an ambulance, because even though you administer the injection and it sort of reduces the histamine buildup, etc., what can happen is the food that you've ingested can cause a second reaction. So even if you've got one, it's vitally important to get an ambulance out and instruct to the paramedics or whoever you're talking to over the phone that somebody's had an anaphylactic reaction, because they will come prepared with a second pen if it's needed. Because the last thing you want is just to listen to what the customer's saying, because even if the customer says, no, I'm absolutely fine, reject it and just say, no, we're calling an ambulance because your safety is paramount. And ultimately, from a restaurant's reputation, the last thing you want on the front page of the local news, national news, is that your restaurant resulted in somebody dying, even if you're not even at fault. The public see past it and they're just like, well, they might not be at fault, but still someone died there.
Yeah, you just get tarnished by that brush, don't you? And reputation is so important, because it's what's the quote? I think it's Warren Buffett says something like, it takes a lifetime to build, but it can be lost in a second, or words to that effect anyway. And
it's absolutely true. And I've got a story, and you might have remembered this, because this was 2019. So will you remember the butcher, Russell Hume?
Doesn't ring a bell to me, no.
Well, within hospitality, Russell Hume was one of the leading butchers. It was one of the best. You go back to the 1980s, it won the Queen's Award for butchery. So you imagine how big it was. And so it built up this reputation across decades. And then in 2019, there'd been some sort of problem somewhere, and they were investigated by their local authority, and it was found that they were relabeling foods, so giving foods an extended shelf life. And that was it. They were closed down. For about 300 people just lost their job overnight just from this one incident. So it speaks volume, just as you're saying, like, literally it can take years to build it up, but just one incident can just ruin it for you.
Yeah. There we go. Everybody take care and do things properly, and no shortcuts and no little naughty infringements over the law. Is the way forward. Yeah. So in terms of, you've given us a good summary of the case that led to Natashas Law, but what's the upshot of that in terms of changes to legislation, and what does that mean for both businesses and us as consumers going and having takeaway food or eating in restaurants? How has it changed our risk?
So now with the way that Natashas Law has come into play is, as I said, before it used to only be a partial ingredients list with a very few select products, whereas now anything that is pre-packed for direct sale is classified under this regulation, which means that the full ingredients list needs to be supplied on a label. So whether this be the flour that's in the bread, whether it be any of the E numbers, chemicals, the ham, if you've got ham in there, whatever it is that's in there needs copying over onto the label that goes on the packaging. Now, there's a bit of a sort of a two-sided on this to how this is implemented. So imagine if you were coming up to a deli counter and I was behind it and I had something packaged and you said, I'd like whatever that was in that packaging. Because that's packaged and it's sealed, I would need to make sure that that had the full ingredients list on it. Whereas if you came up to a deli counter and said, I would like a cheese and ham sandwich, for instance, and I made that cheese and ham sandwich and then put it in a package for you, then it wouldn't need the ingredients list.
Right.
And this applies to every single product that is packaged before the sale is made, regardless whether it's tea, coffee, sandwiches, baguettes, pizzas. So if you imagine, you think to fast food chains that anticipate a rush, if they make a load of hamburgers, cheeseburgers, and have them already, they're classified as a pre-packed product. So they should have the full ingredients list. Whereas if they're making it to the orders, then they don't need the ingredients list. So even if it's only a couple of seconds difference, it's just a completely bizarre situation to be in. And it has confused the industry quite a bit, because there's certain examples of, well, what's classified as a packaged product. If you've got, for instance, a baguette and it's got the sleeve open at the end, are we classifying that as a packaged product or not? Because you can handle the food. And by the regulation, if you can handle the food, it's not classified as pre-packed food. But then if you were to get a piece of tape and fold that over, then it's classified as packaged. So as you can see, the regulation, it's like most laws and regulations, it's got a lot of very specific circumstances and terminology. I mean, there's something along the lines of it, if it's under 10 centimeters squared, the largest face of the food product, the packaging, if it's under 10 centimeters squared, then it doesn't require any information on that packaging. Whereas if it's over, then it requires the full ingredients list.
Right. Yeah.
I can see yourself looking at me thinking, God, this is a little bit complex.
It does seem complex, and it makes me wonder, will the net effect of this be a positive or a negative one? I suppose it's like anything in safety where you don't know what you've prevented, do you? You can't necessarily quantify what you've prevented, so you just have to hope for the best, I suppose.
No, absolutely. Well, I mean, that's what we all do in safety. We never really see or hear of the successes, because we only really hear of the failures. And so, I mean, as long as my email box stays empty and I don't hear anything, I consider that as a good day. Whereas if I wake up in the morning and I've got 20 new emails, I know that something's gone wrong somewhere.
Yeah, that's very interesting way of thinking about it, isn't it? Whereas if you're a salesperson, you'd want a full inbox of sales inquiries. So yeah, totally different world.
Yeah.
So are there any other changes on the horizons in terms of legislative amendments or any other kind of big trends that might drive changes in the food safety markets in the next couple of years?
As far as like direct food safety, it's a very, very interesting time. And I've done a small article for HSE People about this as well, because now that we're out of Europe, we have a very particular and new situation where a lot of the European legislation that we've adopted, and we've adopted it as like a part-time deal, we're in this situation where the FSA has now got complete freedom to decide how they want to move forward with their food safety controls, guidance, laws, etc. So, as I've said, that we led the world as the first food safety international conference. So now they have that opportunity to sort of say, well, we've held the first one. Now let's show the world that we are the leaders on controlling of food safety. As I've said, Japan, America, they're already leaps and bounds ahead of us in terms of their food safety controls. But with how established we are in the world, there's no reason why we can't lead the pack and move forward with it. Now, for actual factual changes into food safety, in July this year, we have an update for nutritional information, which is probably quite interesting because we're starting to, or at least the FSA is starting to see that the health of the population is also a food safety risk.
Yep.
So from July, any business or any franchise that has over 250 employees will have to start displaying any nutritional information related to that dish, which can serve major benefits, because when you sit down for a meal, it can be quite hard to think, well, which dish has got the most salt content in, which has got the most sugar content in. And quite surprisingly, if I was to say to you, you've got a salad, so just a normal like Caesar salad or a chicken dinner, the Caesar salad will likely have more salt and sugar in that dish than the chicken dinner will, which usually surprises most people. But obviously, if you're not a nutritionist, you're never going to realize that, and you're never going to think that. Whereas if people have that information in front of them and they're thinking about their weight, they're thinking about the health of themselves, they can look at a menu and make an informed decision so they can still enjoy themselves when they're eating out, but at the same time still remain healthy. And then secondly, it's a bit of a complex time, because in Wales and Northern Ireland, it is mandatory for all businesses to display their food hygiene rating. So no doubt we'll have all seen a lot of businesses that have this green sticker that says 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, etc. But in England, we don't have to display that information. Now, some businesses will say that's a fantastic thing. Most of the businesses that say that will be the businesses that don't achieve that 5 or at least 4. Whereas from a consumer point of view, I mean, it's like me, I have to go online to check a business's rating. So that's time out of my life to be able to go and do that. And sometimes it can become so much hassle when you're in a city centre and you can't find any 5s anywhere. It can make it a bit more frustrating from me. But I think, and they've seen this across Northern Ireland and Wales, that since they've included mandatory display of that sticker, they've seen a massive improvement in food safety standards.
Which makes logical sense, yeah.
I mean, could you imagine if that sticker was also associated with the health and safety of the public, the staff, etc.? Imagine adding a slips category into the sticker as well. And their food hygiene rating is affected by how well they manage health and safety. Then you'd probably see a major increase on businesses' ability to combat health and safety issues.
Well, you know, what gets measured gets managed, and it's in my area of slips. You know, the big frustration, one of the big frustrations, is that people just simply aren't doing any real measurement at all in terms of inputs. They're measuring the outputs, and you know, and we're seeing hundreds of thousands of people going to A&E every year, and billions of pounds of claims and things like that. But people aren't doing the simple testing, like the slip testing, for example, that you can do to try and reduce the risk and prevent these things from happening. So anything that sort of improves measurement, I think, is a good thing. And as you say, I think it would drive people on to improve. And that's what we should be seeking to do, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's like I say, it's Wales and Northern Ireland already that have seen massive improvements. So as much as a lot of essentially what I will call the non-compliant businesses will not be overjoyed if and when it does come into effect, ultimately from the public's point of view, they will know that the food safety standards and food hygiene standards will improve, because no businesses will ever be proud to themselves that they have to display the sticker. And it's very specific where the sticker has to be displayed. It has to be displayed in a viewable area on the front side of the building. So it has to be either on the front door or on one of the front facing windows. So it's not like you can hide it in an upstairs window where no one's going to see.
Yeah, no, exactly. I think, well, that sounds like that could be a good step forward if that comes. So let's see what comes of that over the next year or two. So penultimate question I had for you was one just to help those people in the audience that are joining us today. What would be the top, say, 3 tips you've got for people to ensure food safety in their own homes? You know, when they're sitting at home and thinking about making some food or whatever, what would you say would be the top three things to consider in that scenario?
First thing, cross-contamination. That's always been believed to be the main cause of food poisoning, food disease, pretty much since we started teaching food safety. And we relate cross-contamination to any raw foods, so raw chicken, raw meat, etc., and any ready-to-eat food, so whether that be bread, anything that doesn't require cooking that you literally put together. Those two products, they have to be kept separate. So you keep all your raw meat or your raw vegetables, you keep them separate from all the stuff that you would consider as ready to eat, doesn't need to do anything with it. Because the moment that you cross-contaminate, then you've got a real serious problem of essentially causing yourself food poisoning, which then leads on to the second point, which is pretty much very, very related to cross-contamination, which is general hygiene. So that is ensuring that you know how to wash your hands properly, because it's amazing. I mean, I have a fluorescent gel, and with learners, all I do is I get them to put this gel on their hands. And once they put it on their hands, we get a UV light and it shows the gel all over their hands and cracked in the corners across the nails, etc. And then we say, okay, go and wash your hands. And so they go and wash their hands, they come back, and I would say 90%, 99% of the time, everybody comes back and they've missed in between the fingernails, they've missed in between the fingers, they've missed around the thumb, around the wrists. And we sort of really say to learners, all that areas that you've missed, that's bacteria. So when you've handled a chicken, all those areas, that's bacteria that you've missed, that you're going to touch some other food, whether it be making a sandwich, for instance. That's all going to essentially congregate onto the sandwich, and then whoever's going to eat that sandwich is going to become ill. But then the really, really interesting thing about that is when everybody's washed their hands and you've done the UV light on it, you then say, okay, before we actually move on to the next subject, should we go and have a look at the hand wash station? So we go over to the sink where everyone's washed their hand, use the UV light, and there's just splatters of UV gel just all over the place. And you're just like, look at that. Look at all that potential bacteria that's all over the place. So then you're instructing them and sort of saying, well, this is why it's vitally important to make sure that you wash sinks down. So for anybody listening, thinking about cross-contamination, personal hygiene, your own personal hygiene is paramount, but then also the cleaning of anything that you use to essentially keep your own personal hygiene is important. But I remember one time where we managed to actually also realize something else, because we put this UV gel on, and everyone had gone through the door to the kitchen. So we'd done the test on the hand wash basin, but we turned the lights off and I had this UV light shining around, and I noticed that the door handle had loads of this gel on. And I said, right, look, everyone, we've all touched that door handle. So other than actually cleaning the sink as well, we need to make sure that we clean the door handle, because all it takes is us to touch that door handle, then go and pick up a plate, pick up a sandwich, etc. And then the sandwich is contaminated. Yeah. So yeah, that's two. What would be the last one? Now, the last one is very, very simple. Now, I know we spoke about this on the podcast that I did with you the other day, Christian, which is about the thorough cooking, because it's one of those things where people don't tend to focus too much on. They just follow what the cooking instructions is. Yeah. And something I had early on in the week was me being very lazy to say I'm a fully qualified chef. I had a hunter's chicken meal, and I put it in the oven and followed the cooking instructions. It was 45 minutes at 180 degrees Celsius on a fanisted oven. So I followed the cooking instructions. Then it came out, it looked piping hot. The cheese had all melted and started to crisp. So I put it on a plate, sat down, went to start eating it, cut it in half, the center of the chicken's pink. And I'm like, oh, well, that's disappointing. So it made me think then, it's like, well, I know what I'm doing, but how many people would not just think, am I putting in a bit of variation there? Am I thinking about how old my oven is, because obviously when these manufacturers make these products and do their testing, they're testing it over and over again in an oven that's probably brand new, been serviced on a regular basis. And so they're saying, yep, 40 minutes, it's working in this oven, we're absolutely fine. Whereas our ovens at home, we probably don't get it serviced as much, and it's probably wear and tear, etc. So the third rule that I would say to absolutely everyone is, whenever you're cooking anything that needs to be cooked, ensure it is piping hot thoroughly. And I would say to everyone, go and buy a probe. You can get a probe off online for a couple of quid. It's inexpensive. And the golden rule, we say, is 75 degrees Celsius. That's the safe point for pretty much all food products.
Unless, like me, you enjoy rare steaks, and then you can go a bit less.
Yeah, well, steaks is a completely different avenue. Because what a lot of people...
I've got a probe thermometer for primarily for steaks, but I do use it for other things as well.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I get a lot is about the difference between steaks and burgers. A lot of restaurants say, well, why aren't I allowed to serve medium rare burgers? And the thing is when you have your steak, because the steak is a solid piece of meat, the bacteria is all on the outside. Yeah. So even when you have a large joint that's maybe, 20 kilos, and that's being portioned into steaks, what's happening is the knife is pushing any bacteria on the surface through with the meat. So that bacteria is all on the outside. It doesn't run through the meat. Yeah. So when you sear it in a pan, you're killing all the bacteria on the outside.
Yeah. Whereas a burger is all mushed up and the bacteria is inside. Yeah. I did a barbecue course and they were talking to us about this.
Okay. Well, there is a way to do medium rare steaks, and it's very, 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 very technical and probably more hassle than it's worth. But if you were, for instance, to get a steak and have it as a joint, sear it all on the outside in a piping hot pan or in a piping hot oven, and then shave off all the external part of it, so you expose the raw amount of it, and then put it in a mincer that hasn't had any raw meat through it. Then you could mince it down and make a medium rare burger if you wish.
Yeah. Which no restaurant's going to do that because that's too much hassle and too much cost.
Because then they, by law, they have to have two different mixers because it's classified as a complex piece of machinery.
Right. Yeah, makes sense. Okay, well, perhaps I might try that out one day if I can be bothered. But if I do, Brendon, I'll report back.
Well, if I don't hear from you, I'll presume that
it's all gone horribly wrong.
Yeah.
So bringing this to a close, then. Thank you very much for sharing your time. It'd be great just to hear about what you are doing personally to help this fight, if that's the right word, towards ensuring food safety. So, talk to us about the college, talk to us about the podcast, talk to us about the business, and the Facebook group that you're active in as well, maybe, and how can people get in touch with you as well?
Well, I'll explain how people can get in touch with me, because I'm renowned for just rambling on about a number of things. So I'll get that out of the way, and then you can stop me when you've had enough of listening to me. So people can get in contact with me just by searching my name, Brendon Ireland. You'll usually find some form of social media that I'll be on there. I'm always open to anybody to send me a request or ask a question. More than happy to help absolutely anybody. You'll also find me with the National College of Hospitality. It's a business that I founded probably about 5 years ago when I started up my enthusiasm into food safety. The National College, it's purely focused at hospitality, because one of the things missing in food safety is designated food safety learning towards the hospitality sector. A lot of the previous courses, they're all designed towards a more manufacturing or production form of food, whereas when you try and take the textbooks from those courses and put them into a realistic hospitality environment, it's incredibly difficult and it's just words. So what's going on my life and how am I combating food safety? Combating and championing for food safety. Yeah. Well, the most important thing is trying to be realistic with the businesses that I'm working with, and just sort of trying to come in as a friend. One of the big benefits I have over a lot of your normal environmental health practitioners and other food safety personnel is I've got that chef background. So when I walk into a kitchen, I have that sympathy where I can say, right, guys, I know exactly what you're going through because I've done the 12-hour shifts. I've been behind the grill where it's 46, 47 degrees Celsius and you're sweating all over the place. I understand the pain you're going through. And most of the time when I walk in, I'm not wearing a suit or dressed up for the occasion. I'm dressed down because I know that the chefs in the kitchen, they don't dress up to go to work. So why am I going to try and dress up and come across as somebody that's essentially beyond their own means? It's about keeping that respect. And I would probably say luckily, or I think fortunately, it's done wonders for me to be able to have that sort of rapport with all the kitchens. So that's where I am combating food safety from actually seeing from the ground up rather from the top down approach.
Yeah.
On the other side of things, later on this year, I'm actually advancing my own food safety knowledge because me, myself, I'm not within sort of the top class of food safety. I'm at that stage where I'm just enthusiastic about learning about food safety.
Well, Brendon, just stop. I don't know if it was me or you, but it sort of went a bit. Blah, blah, blah.
Oh, right,
so
okay.
If you could just go in from later this year, because that's where you were just, and then just carry on from there, that'd be great.
Right, okay. So later this year, I'm actually going to further my food safety knowledge, as I don't really hide it that I'm probably not the most knowledgeable food safety person within any of the circles. I'm just really, really enthusiastic about food safety. I mean, I don't tend to sit there and watch nighttime TV. I tend to sit there at the computer with my resource book, reading random research articles from the Advisory Committee of Microbiological Safety, and just sort of be really, really into it. So later this year, I'm hopefully going to be going to Birmingham University doing the higher certificate in food safety to sort of expand my own knowledge. And I'm looking really, really forward to be able to sort of share as much information as to what's involved in that, and also spending a lot of time actually in laboratory, seeing my little friends through a microscope, and getting to actually know what they actually look like in person, seeing if we kick it off, if we make it to that second date. But then from there, everything I'll be focusing on will mainly be with the National College and seeing what the rest of this year brings. Hopefully we make it through the rest of this year without having to spend it inside for a long period of time in another lockdown.
Yeah, I know, fingers crossed. And tell us a bit about the podcast.
So yes, the podcast, obviously you've been on one, Christian, and I've got loads lined up, and I've decided that even though I'd started it for Food Safety February with the HSE people, I'm actually going to carry it on because I've got some really, really exciting interviews coming up, and I don't actually want to say who it's with because I want to leave everyone in suspense and just keep clicking on them every single time. But now I'm going to carry that on throughout the year and actually
but you've already spoiled it because you said I was on.
Well, I mean, we've got to start off with a really, really big name and then sort of get a couple of little names in there to keep the suspense going.
Fine. No, that makes sense. And Facebook group you're involved in as well, if people are on Facebook and interested in this topic?
Yes, so the Facebook group, there's about 5,000 of us on there, from chefs to environmental health officers and practitioners to other lunatics like myself that are just generally.
And
just
I'm in it as well. And a lunatic.
But yeah, it's a generally really, really nice group as well. You don't get the normal over criticism over things. We're very, very welcome. We welcome people of all different levels of knowledge, and even if you ask what others might consider as a really, really stupid question, we'll just answer it as normal human beings and just say, well, this is the answer, there you are. It's a very, very, very open group. It's Food Safety UK, which you'll find on Facebook, and it's managed by my lecturer, Steve Pepper, who's a fantastic guy, but sadly he's at retirement age now.
Very good, very good. Brendon, thank you very much for joining me Really enjoyed it. Particularly loved some of the stories and a few laughs we've had along the way. So thank you very much for that. And thanks everybody in the audience as well for joining us today. And we look forward to seeing you again next week with another interview. Cheers.